Thanks for coming over to session number 8. We're now going to get wet. And from our next guest, I'm hoping that just like me, you start to feel a bit salty, a bit wind blown, a bit wet, and nothing really dries properly like seawater, because I'm now going to bring in my great friend, Sylvia Earle. It's a bit tricky sometimes, Sylvia, as to how to introduce you, because there's this great long list. And I introduced you fairly recently, and I went through National Geographic Explorer in residence. I did the Time magazine thing, the NOAA, the whole bit. And after I'd done everything, and I was really pleased with myself, you said, you forgot, oh, and of course, Her Deepness, which we all love. You told me I'd forgotten one, and I was so embarrassed. And what it was Sturgeon in Chief.
Sturgeon General.
Sturgeon General, yes. Apologies. Well, Sylvia, thanks so much for joining us. I've done my best to reorganize the mosaic behind me to have a bit more water, more visible in the middle, to make you feel completely at home. The Global Biodiversity Festival is just running beautifully. We're now in 82 countries, thousands of people. We did have a live session from my spiritual home, Antarctica, this morning, and we've got another one coming. So we have covered, 7 continents. There is an enormous scope and range that goes from global economies, that goes to fine detail of collecting certain data up in trees. It goes from personal experiences from people who are fallen in love with places, put their heart and soul into this work, but how do they get it to make a difference? How does it work? So we've had a wonderful coverage, and I think there is one single common denominator in my mind, and it's that the value of our work at the front line has never been more valued. So that's the sort of, it's driving everything, clearly. I think we've gone are the days when we come home with our science data and wonder, is it going to make a difference? And I was wondering how to find a common denominator to introduce Sylvia Earle after all the long names. And I came up with something, and it's called Stop Killing Fish. So with that in mind, Sylvia, over to you, and hopefully at the end we'll get time to handle questions and for us to have a chat. Sylvia, thanks once again for joining us.
Thank you, Paul Rose. So I'm going to dive right in, taking a look at that blue sphere on the left side of the screen. That's our home. On the right, of course, is one of our nearby planets, Mars. What keeps Earth habitable for us and the rest of life on Earth? Well, it's the water, but it's not just rocks and water that make Earth a living planet. It's life itself that shapes the rocks and the water, and has been doing so for 4.5 billion years, plus or minus a bit. It's taken us about 4.5 decades to significantly alter the nature of nature, inexorably making that blue planet increasingly like the red one. Many talk about trying to make Mars more like Earth. In the meantime, we're doing, it would seem, faster than ever before, everything in our power to really Marsify Earth. We're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We're destroying much of the diversity of life that makes our existence possible. So what are we going to do about it? The key is knowing we've got a problem. What are the biggest problems? Well, you might look back to the 1950s when we really did some terrible things to the ocean, testing nuclear bombs, blasting whole coral reefs in an instant, vaporizing categories of creatures that once made their home and were innocent to the effects of humankind. Or you might say, no, the biggest problem is probably oil spills. That's a perception of some, that Our quest for fossil fuels in the sea has led to oil spills, and certainly that has led to some significant issues. The burning of fossil fuels to power our civilization give us so many benefits, so much that has really been in our favor because of the source of energy that we have been powering through in the last century or so, mostly the last half century, as we have scaled up access to oil and gas and to expand coal to power our civilization, to power communication, travel. We now know what we know largely because we exploited the fossil fuels in recent decades to get us to the skies above and into the depths of the ocean below. But now we know that we have to change. That's perhaps the greatest gift of burning through fossil fuels, the gift of knowing we have to change. There's another problem, and some might say this is one of the biggest problems facing the diversity of life, our life very much included. That is production of plastic, synthetic materials that have served us well, but they have become a serious problem in the ocean as they break down into smaller and smaller pieces, microplastics, even nanoplastics. But they also serve actively, and even after the nets have been used, sometimes discarded or lost at sea, and continuing to catch. But it's the deliberate, legal catching of ocean wildlife that is having one of the greatest impacts on planetary health. If I were some evil alien trying to alter the nature of this planet, the nature of nature, I would change the chemistry, I would change the temperature. In 2 big strokes, life would be altered forever, or maybe not even be possible based on what we now take for granted as life on Earth. So, removing on the order of 100 million tons of ocean wildlife every year presently, driven largely by a taste that has been acquired over mostly recent decades for creatures taken from the sea that we generally refer to as seafood. This is apart from the food, the creatures from the sea taken that actually feed people who have few choices, sustenance. Island nations, coastal communities for thousands of years have drawn sustenance from the sea. But today, we're using techniques for extracting and marketing ocean wildlife, the diversity of life from the sea, on a scale that we now know simply cannot be sustained. This is just a glimpse of Monterey, California, a picture taken by a friend, Amos Knockham, just about a week ago. Squid fleets that really leave not as much sustenance for the other creatures who live in the sea, the whales, the dolphins, the big fish, the birds, the many creatures who rely on squid for their sustenance. We're taking their lunch and their breakfast and their dinner. And for what? Squid to be used for bait? Squid to be used for luxury dining? This is not feeding people for their needs. It's giving people choices. So, what do? Armed with knowledge that did not and could not exist before right about now. Now we know what could not be known before the middle of the 20th century. Before the middle of the 20th century, part of the image that you see on this map in green, that around the borders of the continents, did not exist as exclusive economic zones declared by the nations that have coastal waters. Jurisdiction by countries all over the world now gives claim to much of the ocean, but the remaining part, the part that's blue, the high seas, remain under the jurisdiction, basically, of all of us. Everyone has a vested interest in the global commons known as the high seas. And right now, in 2021, we have the best chance we will ever have to really look at how to behave ourselves within the jurisdictions that are portrayed here. National interests, we have some power, nations do, about what to do or not do in their coastal waters. In the high seas, we all have a voice. What happens to the future of these waters? All things considered, what we're putting into the ocean, what we're taking out of the ocean, represent major issues. But what still remains as a big headline is lack of truly knowing the nature of most of the ocean. The greatest era of exploration, whether it's in the coastal waters of nations around the world, out 200 miles in their exclusive economic zones, or in the high seas beyond. We still have so much to learn. Only about 15% of the sea floor has been mapped with the same accuracy that we have for the moon, for Mars, for much of the rest of our solar system, and certainly the rest of Earth. And although we can see the top of the ocean comprehensively and measure activities going down to a few hundred meters, below that, the ocean itself, the part between the top and the bottom, is still largely unexplored. Few people have been even to 1,000 meters, let alone to those lucky individuals, about a dozen so far, who've been to the deepest part of the ocean. And it's only 11 kilometers from the surface. We still have so much to explore. But as never before, we do have the access, we have the technology, we have the capacity, we have millions of divers actually observing at least the upper 50 meters of the ocean, and using some of the technologies that now exist, undersea robots and the like, we're getting a better glimpse of the ocean than ever before. Now we can see what our predecessors could not, to get up close and personal with undersea systems that rival the greatest diversity of life on the land. In fact, you could say that in the image that you're looking here, there's more diversity represented if you look down among the corals, among the sponges, and within the substrate below, you're likely to find as many phyla, as many divisions of animal life as occur in all of the land put together. Not as many species, perhaps, but in terms of the big wedges of biodiversity that make up life on Earth, this is where the action is. And I don't mean just coral reefs. I mean, even in the seawater itself, you may find as many as a dozen or 15 phyla of animals, major divisions of life. That is now at risk because of changing chemistry of the ocean, because of changing temperature of the ocean. This puts not just the ocean at risk, but of course, now we know we're putting ourselves at risk through what we're doing, the damage we're inflicting on life in the sea. This is a reef that I first visited in the 1970s, and then I returned to just in recent times and found the transformation from that rich, colorful kind of reef system that was shown a moment ago into what looks like, well, you can see, it's just barren. Kelp forests, not just coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass meadows, and the forests of microalgae, microorganisms, are all at risk owing to the changing chemistry, the changing temperature that have come about in recent times owing to human activities. I want to just focus for a moment on the diversity of life in this screen. Diatoms and some creatures that you can't see at this magnification that are so small that they have only been discovered since the 1980s. The blue-green bacteria that actually do much of the heavy lifting in terms of generating oxygen, capturing carbon, powering the great ocean food webs, providing sustenance for zooplankton that in turn provides sustenance for the larger zooplankton and small fish that power the big fish. Sometimes it's possible while diving to see the food chain, to see the chemistry of the ocean in action. And it's smart to be able to watch it without becoming a part of the action yourself. But this is the food chain, this is the nutrient cycle, this is what everyone should grasp and hold as an understanding of the eat and be eaten world that is out there in the sea. These small, medium, and large organisms that transfer energy from one to the other. These images from Michael All, just a glimpse of some of the creatures that are out there that few humans have the privilege of seeing unless they dive themselves at night or to go out in a submarine to go deep and to realize most of life on Earth not only is in the ocean, but most of life on Earth lives in the dark all of the time, because most of life on Earth lives below where sunlight penetrates into the twilight zone and into the great depths below. We are in ignorance largely of the processes that are taking place out there, but at least we're beginning to know what we don't know. This image Brian Scurry has taken of tuna, some of the iconic creatures of the ocean that power their way around the sea in the major oceans of the world. And in so doing, as carbon-based units, as part of the nutrient cycle, they are conduits for the chemistry of the ocean. I mean, there's so much that we have to really take in and appreciate, knowing what we now know and facing the reality that policies were made that govern the nature of the ocean today, when the ocean was a different place than it is today. We had expectations of how much we can extract from the ocean based on what could be done, maybe safely, maybe not, but going back 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, when the ocean was more intact, we put in place laws, policies, habits, beliefs that relate to what the ocean can deliver, thinking that the ocean was too big to fail, so big, so vast that we could put anything into it we wished and take anything out of it we wished, basically with infinite capacity. But now we know, and now that we understand that on the order of 90% of many of the big fish, swordfish, tunas, sharks, like whales, we have the capacity to so reduce their numbers with the efficient means that we now have that did not exist 100 years ago, or 70 years ago, or 50 years ago, and some technologies that did not exist even 20 years ago now being brought to bear to find and capture and market ocean wildlife, fostering the biggest wildlife trade on the planet. But now we know. We've changed our attitudes about whales. We've even changed our attitude about whale sharks. Although whale sharks, like this beautiful animal, are still taken in some places for their fins, for their meat, for use as largely as bait. There's a growing attitude of respect and care, just as there has been for whales and dolphins and sea turtles. When might we have the same approach to other forms of wildlife in the sea as we now accord to birds and to turtles, whales, seals, sea lions? I mean, ask the fish, when are you going to look at us as wildlife? When are you going to treat us with dignity and respect instead of just looking at us as either expendable or as products? We've come a long way since I began exploring the ocean in the 1950s. We've learned so much about what the ocean is, what it delivers to all creatures everywhere. Even those who have never seen the sea or touched the ocean now know, at least the evidence is there, that the ocean touches them with every breath we take, every drop of water we drink. We have a planet that works in our favor because of the existence of the diversity of ocean life, more so even than the diversity of life on the land. Take away all of the life in the sea, life on the land could not exist. Take away all of the diversity on the land, it would be a very sad world. But life would go on. The ocean is the primary driver of planetary functions, and it is really based on the fact that it's alive. So, the choices we now face, based on knowledge, we can no longer claim ignorance for the reason for behaving toward ocean wildlife as we now do. Can this not be a 21st century turning point? This year, the beginning of a decade of ocean exploration, a decade of enhanced ocean care. Might we reach that goal of 30% of the land, the waters of the world, in the next 10 years, to realize we must take care of the diversity of life as if our lives depend on it, because they do. Paul, can we go back and can I have a word with you, please?
Yes, please.
Where are you?
I'm here. I'm right with you, Sylvia. I'm not wet yet. I'm not in the sea with you, but I'm running alongside you best I can.
Well, I think that's a goal we should make come true.
You're telling me
shouldn't have to wait
as soon as possible. You know, Sylvia, that was a terrific call to action. I absolutely loved it. And I've heard you say this before, that we now have that sense of being armed with knowledge. We've never had so much knowledge. Plus, we are in a recognized sweet spot, aren't we? I mean, since COVID-19 has arrived in our lives, everybody seems to understand the message that our health relies on everybody else's health, which relies in turn on the health of nature. We've got that message. You and I would have been drinking champagne to have heard that message in the press a few years ago.
And I think the most important message is when we realize that our existence is at risk, our health, our security, our life is on the line, we can make radical change quickly. Now, my question is, we've had this habit, and we have laws to enforce it, that it's okay to treat ocean life as commodities in a way that we used to do for the land, we used to do for life everywhere. But the biggest wildlife trade on the planet right now are ocean creatures. You know, it's wildlife trade. People just don't want to acknowledge fish as wildlife. But tell me, how can this not be the truth? Fish are wildlife. And of course, some people will rely on fish and other sea life for sustenance. And that's a category apart from the large-scale industrial extraction of life from the sea that is breaking the nutrient cycle, changing the chemistry of the ocean, altering the nature of nature in ways we simply cannot afford if we are to have a planet that works in our favor.
Wise words, Sylvia. Thank you so much there, Sylvia. And look, we'll see you again very soon, hopefully in the sea, which would be great, or at least at sea. And for everybody watching, you know, if you're thinking about the sea, want to follow Sylvia's work, please do find Sylvia online. She's very visible on most social media platforms, and you see her in the press and, of course, on National Geographic and all the rest. So, Sylvia, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the great work, and I hope to see you at sea very soon indeed. Thanks again, Sylvia. Have fun. See you.